Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, let's talk about Dead Space. There are some new screenshots leaking on the Xbox store page, no less. 3 shots in full. However, one of them has been used a few months ago on various write-ups about the game, but we do have 2 new shots to talk about, which we can show here. And I thought we'd just have a general conversation about Dead Space, because there's another report doing the rounds from Tom Henderson over on Insider Gaming, saying that we'll be getting a full gameplay reveal thing across October, because various outlets have managed to get hands on with the final build, or close to the final build of the game, I would assume.
Dude, I'm so excited for this game. I'm so excited for this game. The more I see from it, and granted, we've only got a few new screenshots, but we've got a little bit of gameplay out there as well, the more excited I am for it. And what actually makes me most excited for this game, that's a lot of excitement in that sentence, is just kind of how much the developers and EA generally seem to be listening to fan feedback. You know, when the first kind of gameplay footage dropped, there was a lot of kind of potential criticism over the way some of the weapons sounded, some of the way like the presentation kind of worked, and you know the developers have taken that on board and gone back to kind of like tweak really granular aspects, like you know like the sound effects of weapons and the kick of weapons and stuff, and kind of taken that on board to try and fine tune this remake to make it as authentic to the original as possible. And I just think that's like a really cool approach to remaking a game.
That seems to be the overall consensus with this in the report that Henderson put together, is that it's a remake done right. And I think that it's interesting looking at the last few years of remakes that we saw the way that Activision approached it, which I would say so far is the industry best way to do it. Like, you know,
probably the best thing Activision has ever done.
Yeah, kind of. I look at the likes of the Crash Bandicoot remake, the Spyro remake, and then taking that information, you know, the lessons learned on the dev side, and then doing a Crash 4, and same with the Tony Hawk's games. The sad thing with that is that Activision aren't doing any more of them. They're not bothered about doing any more Tony Hawk's games, or it doesn't seem like they are. They pulled the teams off those projects. But I still feel like that, you know, threw down the gauntlet, showed the industry how it can be done, and this is EA's first attempt at doing something like this with this much money behind it.
Yeah.
And so it's that whole conversation on, do you trust EA not to insert some sort of something in here that'll put us off? Like that's what they did with Dead Space 3.
It certainly is.
And I guess we'll see.
Well, it's kind of weird, like you said, you know, this is EA's first real attempt at a proper remake of this caliber in the vein of the Resident Evil 2 or the Activision remakes, like you mentioned. And even in the remaster space, they've rarely ever dabbled in it. You know, we got Mass Effect, the Legendary Collection last year, and before that, there was only really Burnout Paradise remastered from like a few years before. So like this is kind of like new like territory for them, in terms of ground up stuff especially. And like you said there, I just feel like this feels like a remake done right, at least from what we've viewed so far. And it needs to be right because, like you said again, there's so much ill will around EA as a company. There's a lot of distrust for them as a company to do iconic franchises, especially Dead Space. Correct. But it seems to me that they're learning from their previous mistakes. It's just kind of bittersweet, like I was saying, every single one of these news videos, because like they literally killed Visceral Games, who made the original, and now have handed this production off to, I think it's Motive Studios, right?
Yes, Motive,
who are doing a great job. But man, could you not have figured this out 10 years ago, EA?
That's the thing. Like there is that whole conversation around, does this remake only exist because of Callisto Protocol? I very much think so. I feel like Glenn Schofield getting out there and just doing his Dead Space. Glenn Schofield, the original creator of Dead Space, who didn't do Dead Space 3. As far as I know, that was definitely the thing that moved the dude away from EA.
Right.
But yeah, overall, Glenn Schofield now doing the Callisto Protocol, which looks very, very promising. It's one of my most anticipated games for the rest of the year. And I feel like over at EA, they went, well, we can just do Dead Space. Everyone's going to be talking about Dead Space anyway.
Right.
Let's just get in on that. But I do think it's interesting that Callisto is coming later this year and Dead Space is next year. So it feels like Callisto can still kind of eat its lunch.
Yes.
Unless they do a big old marketing push and go, this is the definitive Dead Space. You don't want that knockoff one from the dude, you know, because how many people pay attention to the creator side of it anyway?
That's true. It is interesting that they're coming out so close together, because already we've had a sort of roller coaster ride of who's come out on top in the court of public opinion. You know, when Dead Space was first announced, it was, oh my god, they're remaking Dead Space. It looks amazing. And then we saw more about Callisto, and it was like, forget about the Dead Space remake. This is the proper spiritual successor. And then, you know, we've got more footage from Dead Space again, more improvements, and then it kind of just keeps like, you know, moving to and fro. And it's for me, I'm more excited for Callisto just because it is something new, and we have experienced Dead Space before, because Dead Space 1 and 2 are still incredible to this day, hold up incredibly well. But that said, I am not going to, you know, turn my nose up at 2 potentially excellent survival horror games releasing within a couple of months of each other.
Space
to me,
horror.
That is quite literally Christmas come early, Scott.
Yes.
Callisto's out early December, and this is out, I think, January, or very around then.
It's a lovely one too. I think, yeah, space horror in general, we had Alien Isolation always gets brought up, and it's like Dead Space always gets brought up. It feels like, not an untapped genre, but it feels like there's more to do. Like, I love the likes of Soma, and a game that I'm forgetting the name of that I played a couple of years ago, where you play as a robot, and you're with a woman, and you go to a planet, and there's a whole big twist at the end. You'll know what I mean if you've played it. That was a very good game. But overall, I feel like the rollout of these games, they're trying to match each other pound for pound, and Callisto has more of a melee-based system, which if we end up doing more Dead Space, maybe we go down that route. But the specific screenshots, though, it does look like it's shaping up very well. I kind of wonder how much they're playing on the feel of the original. Have they updated stuff, or is it more down the visual route? Because obviously the visual side of it is the most immediate one, and it's like, do you steer down that route? Do you try and convince people with the big shiny remake, and then we play it and it feels like 2007? Like, it depends how much you change things in that regard.
It's a good point, because like the original feel of Dead Space 1, isn't perfect, but it has that chunk to it, right? It has that weight to it. I mean, the Dead Space stomp, which Callisto Project has essentially just ripped entirely, is one of the best stomps ever made. We should do that as a list. So the
Dead Space Stomp is the name of my synthwave band.
I'd go to that gig. But it's still like so iconic, it's still so memorable that I think you could more or less pull it over whole cloth and then make those modernizing tweaks to kind of make it compete with a new game. I genuinely think it's almost like an open goal to remake Dead Space, especially when these screenshots come out and they look so good. Like, there's very little you have to do to update that game design, in my opinion, but I know you might argue against me.
I definitely agree. I think that the punch, the heft, the weight of Isaac Clarke has not actually really been done since then.
Not really, no.
It feels like in the 2000s there was this whole steer towards, the way Gears of War was, where it's like giant kebab-legged men squishing stuff, and it was very fun. And I feel like Dead Space was, very much going down that path. And we've moved away from that quite a lot across the 2010s. I can't think of that many big, thick, chunky boys that are still squishing stuff, and I feel like there's a lot of room that can still be capitalized on in that regard. But yeah, for me, you just update it. You maybe speed some stuff up in terms of the way you move around. But it's interesting. I feel like where Dead Space is, a lot of people are looking forward to it, and maybe that's all it needs to be. It just needs to be the Last of Us 1 Part 1 remake of the Dead Space.
I think that works, and I think it works better because it's not coming 9 years after the original drop. You mentioned there, what could they tweak and stuff, and if we're getting very granular about it, I would actually like them to do what Activision did with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2, where they incorporated a few features from 3 and 4 into those original games, like the revert, to kind of just update them enough to keep them fun and feeling modern. And I would actually like to see, for instance, the telekinesis system that was in Dead Space 2 come into Dead Space 1, because it was there in Dead Space 1, but it wasn't as refined. You weren't able to kind of do those really excellent combos where you're chopping off a leg and you're using it to throw at another necromorph. Obviously you could, but it was more obtuse.
That side of it is so overlooked whenever we talk about Dead Space. Obviously you talk about the horror side of it, the atmosphere, the squelching and everything, but we don't talk about the telekinetic power side of it. The games that get held up in that regard are always PsyOps and Second Sight, and then Control after 2019. But Dead Space, especially in 2, I don't know how, I never played that much of 3, but in 2 especially, you start factoring that into your, overall combat stuff. You see a fire extinguisher and you grab it after shooting a dude and smash it in their face, and I want to do that over and over again.
It's one of the most, genuinely, one of the most satisfying gameplay loops that has ever been created, and is why Dead Space 2 is still one of my favorite games of all time. I know that's not being remade right now, but it's why that game still holds up. It still feels great to play. The classic survival horror gameplay where you're stalking hallways, shooting monsters, is complemented by that added layer where you're able to use the environment and the monster's own limbs, which is sick as hell, against other enemies, and that's just it's just so cool. And like you said, kind of hasn't really been done that much in the modern gaming space since.
I tell you as well, Resident Evil 2 Remake was such a reminder of solid third-person horror. I love that game so much. RE3 Remake was fine, but it felt like glorified DLC. It was played well enough, but it was over a bit too quickly. And then we went back to Resident Evil Village, which was first-person again, and I know that's getting a third-person mod later this year, but I feel like RE2 was just such a reminder of that model of gameplay, which, if you're going to go down that route right now, then Dead Space fits very well, and I'll take third person over first person any day of the week.
I knew we were going to get to this conversation.
It's got to be said. But yeah, let us know what you think down in the comments below of Dead Space, and also third person versus first person.
That's right.
As the best genre. For now, I've been Todd from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time.
Bye bye.
Squelch.